Sigmar's double-headed Warhammer sliced through the air, and with each mighty sweep, another of the Green Horde died, its head smashed to a bloody pulp. But still the goblins came on, and each of them became a crushed corpse, victim to the sacred dwarf weapon. What you just heard was the opening paragraph from Shadowbreed, the second book in the Konrad Trilogy, my favourite book when I was 11. It is this trilogy that I'll be looking at in this video, hopefully without too many spoilers. The reason I chose to review this series is purely sentimental. I first encountered the Konrad Trilogy in the early 90s when I borrowed the books from the library. I was 11 at the time, and they were the first fantasy novels that I had ever read. This probably explains why I hold these books in such high regard. It was these books that opened the door to a whole world of fantasy fiction from J.R.R. Tolkien to Robert Jordan. Written by David Ferrings, a pseudonym of pulp sci-fi author David S. Garnett, and commissioned by the Games Workshop, these books, along with the earlier Games Workshop titles, were aimed at building the mythos of the budding tabletop strategy game Warhammer Fantasy Battle. The first two books in the series, Konrad and Shadowbreed, were published in 1990 by GW Books, a division of the Games Workshop. Its final installment, Warblade, 3 years later in 1993 by Boxtree Limited. The trilogy tells the tale of the titular character Konrad and his transformation from hapless slave to formidable warrior in a rip-roaring, Robert E. Howard-esque style high adventure, only with slightly less bombast. The name Konrad is more than likely a cheeky wink to Howard's own Conan the Barbarian. Unlike Conan, however, Konrad himself feels far from invincible. Often throughout his adventures, he is less like an all-conquering hero and more like a prisoner of circumstance, struggling to avoid being smashed on the rocks of fate. In Konrad, you definitely get the overwhelming sense that you are rooting for the underdog. The story begins with Konrad kept in servitude by an abusive innkeeper and his family, an outcast to all in the village where he lives. Elissa, the beautiful only daughter of the local lord, is the only person to acknowledge Konrad's existence, and the two develop an unlikely friendship. The story potters along at a decent pace as the orphan Konrad questions his life in the village and begins to wonder about the world outside. The story really gets going when Konrad notices a strange bronze knight approach the village early one morning. The next day, the village is destroyed by the marauding chaos forces led by the sinister but strangely familiar Skullface. All its inhabitants are brutally slain, all bar Konrad, who's violently unshackled from the tenuous bonds that kept him from escaping years before. A series of fateful encounters later, and Konrad is working as a squire for the taciturn Knight Wolf. Under Wolf's tutelage, he is moulded into a formidable warrior, and this is where I feel the story really comes into its own. Working as a mercenary in the boundaries of the Chaos Wastes, Konrad has plenty of opportunity to fine-tune his skills as a killing machine. The action scenes in the book are described with a pleasing amount of gory detail and occur frequently. As the story develops, Konrad encounters many denizens of the Warhammer pantheon, from Skaven rapmen to goblins, and the even more bizarre. He has adventures with wizards and dwarfs, goes treasure hunting, is captured and made prisoner by the forces of chaos, before ultimately uncovering a plot so dastardly that the fate of the world itself lies in the balance. The central theme to the story is who is Konrad and where does he come from. Little is known or revealed, yet a decent part of the trilogy is dedicated to Konrad trying to uncover clues about his own mysterious origin. An origin of divine destiny, perhaps intertwined with that of the messianic saviour Sigmar. The the books have a dark and gritty feel. The world is suitably sinister and oppressive, with even the most benign encounter potentially fatal. My 11-year-old mind was blown. I was hooked and longing for more. With age comes cynicism, and what once was my favourite book series as an adolescent does not hold up to an older, more well-read me. Things that slipped by me when I was younger no longer have that grace. The writing style is often clunky and cliché. Some of the characters are like paper cutouts, superficial and flat, lacking any real depth and only used to drive the story, and perhaps borrowed heavily from elsewhere. Skullface, anyone? The pacing of the series can feel rather disjointed. The first book, Konrad, moves at a steady pace, and the second starts this way also. However, I get the distinct impression that someone told Konrad to pull his finger out and get the story finished, as the second half of the trilogy feels rushed. I've always had this feeling that Konrad was angling at a story a lot more epic that was left untold, rather frustrating me. In the intervening 25 plus years, I have visited Konrad and the Warhammer world a few times. It is strange how time can change our perspective, how as we get older our tastes change, refine and mature. The series that I first read when I was 11, I reread in my early 20s, and then again more recently in my 30s, with each time losing a little more of its former gloss. But despite its obvious flaws, the Konrad Trilogy is a fantastical, intriguing story that gives a little insight into the early years of the Games Workshop. I understand that changes over the years in the Games Workshop mythos have left earlier titles like Konrad redundant. I feel that the series is geared more towards teenage boys than your old granny, but despite this I would highly recommend anyone looking for something new to read or with a little time to kill not to pass by these books. You can still pick up copies from eBay and Amazon for cheap, or you can buy them online now from the Black Library. Give them a go. You won't be disappointed.